Hello and welcome to her Fireside Stories. In today's gripping story, a devoted mother sacrifices her precious wedding ring to help fund her son's big day, only to face a heart-stopping twist at the very end, where a shocking secret is revealed in front of everyone. Curious about how it all goes down? Make sure to listen to the entire story for the full jaw-dropping conclusion. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us and stay updated on more captivating tales. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below with your personal opinions on the story and let me know where you're tuning in from. A deafening crash echoed in my ears as the security guard's hand slammed against my shoulder, blocking my path into the lavish wedding hall. I nearly dropped the delicately wrapped gift I'd spent months saving for, a beautiful custom-engraved crystal vase, when he barked, "Family only." My heart pounded against my ribs, and the blood rushed to my temples. In that spine-chilling moment, I realized my name wasn't on the guest list for my own son's wedding. My boy, David, the child I had raised alone after his father abandoned us, had somehow cut me out of the biggest day of his life. I'd pawned my wedding ring, my most precious relic of the life I once believed in, to help pay for this elaborate event. And now, a hired guard was telling me I didn't belong. I stood there in a dress I could barely afford, still wearing the faint smell of disinfectant from my cleaning job. Fear clutched at my throat, not just because I was being turned away, but because of what it signified. The polished marble floors beyond the doors reminded me of the countless nights I'd scrubbed away other people's footprints at a local hospital. The flicker of crystal chandeliers above the guests made me think of the overhead bulbs I'd replaced myself when we still lived in that old, drafty apartment. All of it felt like a mocking testament to what David considered high society, a world he thought I was too unrefined to enter. Before the guard could usher me away, I spotted David standing in a circle of elegantly dressed strangers. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, a picture of composure and new wealth. Our eyes met for a split second, long enough to confirm that he knew I was there, long enough for me to register the cold, steely look he'd never worn before. Then he turned his back, leaning in to whisper something into the ear of his bride, Aria Caldwell, the daughter of a powerful, well-to-do family. In that moment, I felt the final thread of our bond threaten to snap. Engagement reminder: if this twist caught you off guard, comment 1 to show your surprise, or 2 if you had a hunch this might happen. Let me know where you're reading from, too. I swallowed my pride, though my vision blurred with unshed tears. "There must be a mistake," I murmured, voice trembling. "I'm David's mother." My words echoed in the high-ceilinged foyer, but the guard didn't budge. His dark suit blended into the opulent surroundings, making me feel like I was shouting at a wall of human granite. Nearby, I noticed a few well-heeled guests, pausing to watch the unfolding scene, their eyes flickering with a mix of curiosity and disdain. The security guard lifted a clipboard to confirm my name. I glanced down at the gift in my arms. I'd chosen the crystal vase after months of hunting for the perfect present, something that would symbolize the fresh start David was about to embark on, something that would sparkle as brightly as the future he once swore he wanted to share with me. Then he turned the page. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, the monotone finality in his voice as solid as the tall pillars that lined the entrance. "Your name isn't here." Refusing to accept it, I leaned to see David through the open door. With every step the guard took inside to relay the problem, an overwhelming sense of betrayal welled up within me. I remembered the day David had come to me, pleading for help to fund this wedding. "Mom," he'd said, "Aria deserves the best. Her parents expect a certain standard, and I can't afford it alone. I'll pay you back when I can, I promise." There was love in his eyes then, or at least desperation. Without hesitation, I took off my wedding ring, the ring his father, Randall, had given me decades ago, and pawned it for the deposit. Though that ring symbolized happier times that had long since slipped away, I believed in David and wanted him to be happy. If only I had known the monstrous secrets lurking beneath his pleas. Engagement reminder. Share a quick thought. Do you believe you do the same for someone you love? Comment 1 if yes, 2 if no, or let me know what you think so far. I watched the guard weave through clusters of guests, dressed in designer outfits, shimmering gowns, and expensive suits that radiated money and status. My presence felt even more jarring against this gilded backdrop. As I lingered by the door, an older gentleman with salt and pepper hair passed by, giving me a polite, if somewhat condescending, nod. In that fleeting moment, I caught a whiff of his cologne, something luxurious and unfamiliar, a fragrance that drew a bold line between his world and mine. Inside, music played softly from a string quartet positioned near a tall window draped in gold silk curtains. Waitstaff glided silently from table to table, carrying trays of champagne flutes. The grandeur felt surreal, like I was peering into an aquarium of exotic fish through thick glass. My heart twisted with equal parts anger and sorrow, but I refused to be dismissed. I deserved to see my son. I deserved to know why he'd iced me out after I'd sacrificed so much. 15 years ago, I had been the one to hold David when Randall walked out on us, taking every last cent from our joint account. I recalled the day I found myself digging into the couch cushions for spare change, the day I realized Randall was gone for good. David had been only 8 at the time, still clinging to the naive hope that his father would return. I promised him that no matter what happened, I would be there, and I had kept that promise, until now, apparently. When the guard re-emerged, I braced myself for an apology, or at least a hint of compassion. Instead, his voice held the same cold detachment. "Mr. Caldwell and your son have clarified the situation, ma'am. You're not on the list. I'm afraid I must ask you to leave." A spark of indignation flared in me. "I'm David's mother," I repeated. This time, my tone was steeled with both hurt and fury. I tightened my grip on the gift, ignoring how my fingers trembled. Engagement reminder. If you're feeling the tension, comment 1 if you're still on my side, or 2 if you think David has his reasons. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Before I could protest further, I glimpsed David approach the threshold, flanked by Arya. She wore a stunning white gown with lace accents that sparkled under the chandeliers, the very definition of a fairy tale bride. As she walked, her father, Mr. Caldwell, stood protectively behind her, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding the assurance of old money. He surveyed the scene, his eyes landing on me with an unsettling mixture of pity and annoyance. "Mother," David said, a stiffness creeping into his voice, "this wedding is, well, it's a private affair. We agreed you wouldn't attend." My mouth went dry. "We agreed?" I repeated, my voice catching. We had never discussed me being excluded, only that it might be a simpler ceremony. That was the last conversation we'd had. "David, I sold my ring to help fund this. At least have the decency to invite me to your wedding, or to let me stand in the back. Something." David's eyes flickered with something between shame and defiance. He reached for Arya's hand, and she gently squeezed it, though I detected a hint of confusion in her expression. "Mom, it's complicated," he replied, lowering his voice. "Mr. Caldwell paid for most of it in the end. He made the guest list. He wasn't comfortable mixing certain aspects of my past with the new life we're trying to build." I felt the sting of his words like a physical blow. "Certain aspects of your past?" I echoed. That was who I was now, an aspect, a relic. My son was speaking about me as though I were an embarrassing secret. Had I truly become such a burden to him? Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, his posture screaming authority. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Miriam. My daughter's happiness is paramount today, and we were told by David that you had, shall we say, personal matters that would prevent your attendance. I glared at David. He lowered his gaze, refusing to meet my eyes. Every second I stood there, I felt more of my heart break. Engagement reminder. Are you still with me? Comment 1. If you feel the mother's pain, or 2, if you think David might be under pressure. Also, let me know where you're reading from. I'm genuinely curious. Suddenly, I remembered all the desperate phone calls David had made to me in the past few months. The contradictory stories about the wedding's budget shortfalls. The way he'd insisted Arya's parents weren't paying for certain parts of the event. And above all, the $58,000 he claimed was needed just to secure the deposit. Every fiber in my being told me something deeper was amiss. My ring, once a symbol of hope, had fetched a hefty sum, enough that I believed it could rescue David from whatever financial jam he was in. Yet here I stood, unwelcome at the very event I'd helped to fund. Anger ignited inside me, a slow burn that intensified with each passing second. You told me the wedding would be canceled if I didn't pawn my ring, I said, my voice shaking. You said Arya deserved her dream venue, so why am I now hearing that Mr. Caldwell paid for everything? For a moment, David looked cornered. Arya watched him expectantly, her brow furrowed with concern. Dad, she said quietly, turning to Mr. Caldwell. Didn't we already have this conversation about finances? I thought we agreed to cover the entire reception cost. Why is Miriam saying she funded it? Mr. Caldwell's stern gaze cut across David like a blade. Indeed we did, Arya. The deposit was fully covered by our family. David insisted on contributing a small portion. He called it personal money for personal touches. His voice dripped with skepticism. I assumed it might be from his savings or a loan. Something snapped in me. I took a step forward, outraged by the layers of deceit. David, look me in the eye and tell me you used my ring money for this wedding, right now. At first, he said nothing, face pale as a sheet. Then, as if a dam broke, he swallowed hard. Mom, calm down. Not everything went exactly as planned. I can explain. Let's not do this here. Engagement reminder, quick check-in, comment 1 if you think there's more to uncover, or 2 if you're ready to see David spill the truth now. Your feedback helps shape the pace. I am doing this here, I countered. You forced my hand. You humiliated me at the door. Now, you're going to explain to everyone in this room why your own mother is on the outside looking in. A hush descended over the entryway. Nearby guests, once preoccupied with laughter and chatter, had paused to watch the spectacle unfold. I spotted a couple of Arya's bridesmaids exchanging uncertain glances, their pastel dresses swirling as they inched closer to the drama. Arya's expression had shifted from confusion to alarm. She reached out to David, but he remained rigid, as if every muscle in his body were locked in place. Maybe we should step aside, Arya ventured, voice trembling. This is supposed to be a celebration, David. Mr. Caldwell crossed his arms, his gaze flicking to Arya protectively. I agree. We should handle this privately. I shook my head. The nerve of these people, holding me at arm's length, then proposing secrecy when it was convenient for them. I couldn't let them contain me like a weed in their perfect garden. No, I said firmly. There's nothing private about what David has done. He came to me, asked for money. I gave him my wedding ring. I gave up the last piece of my past I still cherished. And for what? To be told to go home on his wedding day? David's stare broke, sliding to the marble floor. I almost felt pity for him in that moment, pitifully cornered with no more illusions to hide behind. Almost. Then he took a deep breath and faced me. All right, he conceded. You deserve the truth, but it's not what you think. His eyes flickered to Arya, who looked more worried by the second. Those few words were enough to prick at my curiosity. If it wasn't what I thought, then what exactly was it? My imagination raced. Was he blackmailed? Had he truly found a different use for the ring money? My intuition whispered that the explanation could be far darker than I'd anticipated. Engagement reminder. Feeling the suspense? Comment 1 if you're eager for the bombshell. 2 if you think it might be a red herring. Where's everyone joining from today? David directed a pleading glance toward Mr. Caldwell, who looked unimpressed. Then, turning to me, my son cleared his throat. I had debts, Mom, he said, voice tight. Gambling debts. A collective gasp rippled through those close enough to hear. Even Arya stepped back, her eyes widening as though she had no clue. I got in over my head a year ago, betting on sports games, then at casinos. By the time I met Arya, I was already drowning. The venue deposit story was a cover. I used your ring money to pay off the people who were after me. My mind reeled. I thought about all the times I'd suspected something was off, but dismissed it as wedding stress. The countless phone calls he'd ended abruptly, the missing nights he'd claimed he was working late. Suddenly, they fell into place like puzzle pieces, revealing a horrifying picture. You took my ring, letting me believe it funded this wedding, I whispered, when it actually went to pay off gambling sharks. David winced. I'm sorry. I was planning to invite you, but then I realized you might hear rumors from my bookies if they showed up. They threatened to follow me everywhere, even here. I tried to keep you away to protect you. Arya's face grew ashen. David, we're getting married, she said, voice trembling. And you hid this from me? From my family? She looked to her father, and her lower lip quivered. Dad, did you know about this? Mr. Caldwell's expression hardened further. I suspected something was off, but not this. If I had known, I never would have allowed the wedding to proceed. My business dealings do not align with irresponsible behavior. I almost laughed at the irony. Here was the father of the bride, posturing about moral high ground. Yet I recalled stories David told me of how Mr. Caldwell's company had faced numerous lawsuits. But for now, I kept silent. One revelation at a time was enough to crack the veneer of this ceremony. The wedding guests were still gawking, stuck between polite decorum and the undeniable train wreck unfolding before them. Engagement reminder. What do you think of David's confession? Comment 1 if you're shocked by the gambling reveal. 2 if you sensed something like this. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts. Is this all of it? I asked, my voice quavering. David, if there's more, you better speak now, because any piece of truth that drips out later will only make this worse. My mind flashed back to the phone calls from unknown numbers, the times David looked over his shoulder in public like a hunted man. His father, Randall, had also been a gambler, drifting from one bet to another until he finally gambled away our savings before disappearing into the night. I'd spent years blaming myself for not spotting the warning signs sooner. Now I was reliving the nightmare, only this time through my son. A tremor passed through David's shoulders. It's not just the gambling, he confessed, his voice subdued. There's more. I started embezzling funds from Mr. Caldwell's company. At this, Arya let out a choked cry, stepping away from her groom as if he were radioactive. Mr. Caldwell's face turned stony, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. You stole from my business? Mr. Caldwell asked, voice dropping to a dangerously low register. After I hired you as an assistant financial manager to give you a better start, you realize that's a crime. I could have you thrown in prison. David flinched. I didn't see another way. The debts kept piling up, and the interest rates were insane. They threatened to hurt me, or even Mom if I didn't pay. I planned to pay it all back once I made a big score. I was so sure I'd turn it around, yet I felt as if my entire world was collapsing. Images of David as a child, innocent, hopeful, flashed before me. For years, I had done everything in my power to ensure he wouldn't follow in Randall's footsteps. Yet the cycle had repeated itself, a tragic echo of the past. My anger and heartbreak warred within me, but I forced myself to remain calm. He needed help, real, tangible help, but first he had to face the consequences. Engagement reminder. If you're still here, comment 1 to express your disbelief at how far this has gone, or 2 if you think David might still redeem himself. I'm eager to see your reactions. Amid the shocked murmurs of the guests, a searing clarity hit me. David had orchestrated an elaborate facade, hoping to keep me away so I wouldn't expose him, intentionally or not. Yet here we were, in front of everyone, tearing apart the illusions he'd spun. My eyes traveled across Arya's face, which was now a mask of betrayal. "David," she asked, "did you ever really love me? Or was this all just a means to an end?" His eyes brimmed with tears. "Of course I love you. I wanted to be worthy of you, of this life you have. I know I messed up." Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, an intimidating tower of judgment. "Love is not an excuse for theft. I'm calling the authorities, and you'll have to answer for what you've done." He turned to one of his associates, probably a family lawyer, who nodded in grim agreement. I glanced over at my reflection in a tall mirror near the entrance, noticing how my hair, painstakingly styled that morning, had begun to frizz from the emotional storm. The corners of my eyes carried the weight of every year I'd spent scraping by, working long hours to pay for David's education and basic needs. I looked drained, but beneath that exhaustion lay a steely resolve. "No," I said, stepping between David and Mr. Caldwell. "He will answer for his actions, but I don't want this handled behind closed doors with hush money or private deals. If you're calling the police, then do it. Let them handle it properly." "Mom?" David murmured, panic seizing his features. I could almost read his thoughts. Was I really going to let him face criminal charges? But in the pit of my stomach, I knew I couldn't shield him, not anymore. Engagement reminder. This is getting intense. Comment 1 if you think Miriam did the right thing stepping up, or 2 if you'd have handled it differently. The hush that followed was so profound, I could almost hear the chandeliers hum. What had begun as a grandiose celebration was now a stage for one family's fall from grace. Mr. Caldwell took out his phone, presumably to dial the police. All eyes were on me, and for the first time that day, I felt a strange sense of power. My role had always been caretaker, provider, sometimes doormat, but not today. David's lower lip trembled. His gaze darted between me and Mr. Caldwell, searching for a lifeline. "Mom, please," he whispered. "You can't let them do this to me. I'll lose everything. I'll go to jail." "You should have thought about that before," I replied, my voice tinged with regret. "I can't keep bailing you out. I sold my ring and nearly sold my soul to protect you. But you walked all over me. Enough is enough." Tears slipped down Arya's cheeks. Despite her anger, I could see genuine heartbreak in her eyes. A flurry of memories seemed to flicker behind her gaze. Days spent planning this wedding, nights believing in the man she thought she knew, and the illusions that had kept her afloat. She whispered, "I can't do this, David. I can't marry you." Her father laid a hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into him for support. My own heart clenched, remembering how I'd once leaned on David's father, Randall, for the briefest moment of stability, until it all fell apart. This entire scenario was like a twisted reflection of my past, now haunting my son's life. Just then, 2 uniformed police officers stepped through the door. A hush fell over everyone again. One of the officers, a tall woman with a stern yet sympathetic face, surveyed the scene. "We received a call about a disturbance and potential financial crimes," she announced. Her voice was calm but firm. Engagement reminder. If you feel sympathy for Arya or even David right now, comment 1. And if you think Miriam's doing exactly what needs to be done, comment 2. Let's keep the conversation going. Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, squared his shoulders, and spoke in that authoritative tone that likely carried him through boardrooms. "I'm Peter Caldwell. My daughter's fiancé has embezzled funds from my company and defrauded his own mother. We're prepared to press charges. This," he gestured around the hall, the abandoned half-eaten plates of hors d'oeuvres and untouched champagne flutes creating a surreal backdrop, "was supposed to be their wedding." The officers exchanged looks. "We'll need statements from everyone involved," one replied. "But first, we need the suspect to come with us." David's face went sheet white. He stumbled a step backward as if he might run, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. One of the officers gestured for him to place his hands behind his back. Arya let out a soft sob as she watched, her carefully arranged bouquet slipping from her fingers and landing on the marble floor with a muted thud. White roses scattered, their petals bruised against the cold stone. I stood rooted to the spot, wrestling with an onslaught of emotions. I wanted to scream at David for his recklessness, to cradle him in my arms like the little boy he once was, to demand answers from everyone who had facilitated this farce. But the most pressing sensation was a hollow ache, an emptiness that came from realizing my son was irrevocably changed. "Ma'am?" The female officer spoke gently, placing a hand on my arm. "We understand you pawned a ring to give him money. We'll need your statement, too." I nodded, too numb to form words. The hall had cleared of most onlookers by now, many guests making a swift, embarrassed exit. A few lingered, whispering among themselves, some out of pity, others fueled by morbid fascination. Mr. Caldwell withdrew to a corner with his wife and Arya, quietly consoling the bride who would no longer become a wife today. My eyes flicked to the glistening tears on Arya's cheeks. Despite everything, I felt for her. This day was supposed to be the start of a fairy tale life, and it had degenerated into a nightmare. Engagement reminder, comment 1. If you're still hopeful for any redemption. 2. If you think there's no turning back now. Let me know how you feel about Arya, too. The next few hours blurred into an endless stream of paperwork and questions. Hotel management led us to a private office so the police could take statements away from the prying eyes of the remaining guests. They separated David from me, stationing him in a smaller adjoining room. My boy, no, my grown son, sat alone, hands cuffed in front of him, staring at the floor. I answered question after question, recounting my memories. David's request for money, the pawn shop receipt, my suspicions, even my own regrets about not seeing the signs of his gambling addiction. The female officer scribbled in her notepad, nodding politely but never letting emotion cloud her professional demeanor. She asked if I'd ever received threats tied to David's debts. I described the strange calls and visits from men I'd never met, how I'd shrugged them off as telemarketers or door-to-door salesmen because I couldn't handle the truth. After finishing my statement, I slumped against the office chair, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. I noticed, with some small bitterness, that the opulence of the hotel extended even into the staff areas: plush carpeting, tasteful artwork, and a polished oak desk. Not a speck of dust in sight. Clearly the kind of establishment that catered to people who never worried about paying rent on time. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes," the officer said, returning my ID. I'd gone back to my maiden name after Randall left. "We'll keep you informed about the charges and any court dates." I gave a vague nod. "Will David go straight to jail?" That depends on the arraignment process, ma'am. He may be granted bail, but given the severity of the embezzlement accusation and possible flight risk, it's not guaranteed. Something inside me wilted. This was my child, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and tears over small, fixable concerns. Now, I couldn't even recognize the hollow look in his eyes. I swallowed hard, pushing back the overwhelming tide of sorrow. If there was a path forward, it wouldn't be found in denial. Engagement reminder. If this story is tugging at your heart, comment 1. If you think justice must take its course no matter what, comment 2. And tell me, are you reading this in one sitting or in parts? Hours later, when the police led David away in handcuffs, Aria and her parents were conspicuously absent. I found them near the side exit of the ballroom, wrapped in a tense family discussion. Aria was still in her wedding gown, though the train was now crumpled with footprints from frantic guests. Mr. Caldwell stood protectively beside her, while Mrs. Caldwell fiddled with a diamond-studded handbag, her expression etched with quiet devastation. When Aria caught sight of me, she broke away from her parents and approached. I braced myself for anger, but her tearful eyes held only sorrow. "Miriam," she began, voice trembling. I, I'm so sorry for how everything turned out." She glanced at the bridal bouquet in her hand, half the flowers missing. "I never intended for any of this to happen. I truly cared for David. I had no idea he was capable of stealing, lying." I felt a lump form in my throat. "He loved you," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "In his own flawed way, but he's got demons he's never fully confronted, and he was afraid of losing your respect and your father's." Her lips wobbled. "I don't even know if I can respect him after this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope. "Here," she said, pressing it into my hands. "I don't know if it'll help, but it's a check. I asked my father to give you back the equivalent of what you pawned your ring for." I stared at the envelope. "Aria, you don't have to—" "Please," she cut me off. "It's the least we can do. My father wouldn't have done this on his own, but I insisted. You sacrificed so much, and you deserve at least some compensation." I exhaled a shaky breath, torn between gratitude and the shame of having to accept charity from the same people who initially sided with David's exclusion of me. "Thank you," I whispered. "Truly." Engagement reminder. Do you think Aria did the right thing? Comment 1. If you admire her gesture, 2 if you think it's too little, too late. Also, feel free to share where you're tuning in from. In the days that followed, my life became a patchwork of legal proceedings and raw emotions. David called me from jail multiple times, voice quavering with apologies and explanations. I found myself torn between the maternal instinct to protect him and the deep hurt from his betrayals. His father's ghost lingered at the edges of every conversation, reminding me of how easily David had fallen into the same traps. Aria also reached out, wanting details about David's upbringing, perhaps searching for answers to questions that suddenly haunted her. She asked about the time Randall left, about the challenges David faced as a teen, and how we scraped by financially. We met for coffee at a small cafe, a painfully normal setting for such a fraught discussion. I told her about David's brilliance in mathematics, how he had once dreamed of becoming an architect, and how he'd pivoted to finance after seeing quick money in stocks and gambling. She absorbed it all quietly, eyes moist with sympathy. Meanwhile, I used part of the money Aria had given me to cover the cost of an attorney for David. It pained me to think that my financial safety net, what remained after losing my ring's value, was now going to legal fees. But I couldn't abandon him. Loving someone doesn't mean absolving them of their sins, but it also doesn't mean disappearing when they hit rock bottom. My attorney laid out the odds. Embezzlement was a serious charge. The district attorney would likely pursue it aggressively, especially with Mr. Caldwell's influential connections. There was a possibility of a plea deal if David cooperated and showed remorse. The gambling addiction might be a mitigating factor, but only if we could prove he'd sought help or was willing to. I saw David once in a holding cell, separated by a pane of glass. He looked gaunt, shadows under his eyes. "I messed up, Mom," he said, tears threatening to spill over. "I didn't want to be like Dad, but I guess I am." I pressed my palm against the glass. "You're not irredeemable, but this time you face the music." Engagement reminder. Is Miriam doing the right thing supporting David legally? Comment 1 if yes, 2 if no. I'd love to hear your perspective. Yes, and the court proceedings began 2 weeks later. David appeared in a rumpled suit, escorted by officers into the hearing. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge read out the charges: embezzlement, fraud, and potential racketeering if they uncovered evidence of his ties to illegal gambling rings. My stomach turned at the realization of how far this had gone. Mr. Caldwell was present, arms crossed. Aria sat beside her mother, clasping her hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. The hush in the courtroom only broke when my attorney rose to speak, describing David's history and gambling addiction, painting a portrait of a young man led astray by desperation rather than malice. I wondered if it would be enough to sway a judge used to hearing every sob story in the book. In those long hours, my thoughts drifted to the day I'd met David's father, Randall, a handsome dreamer who seemed full of promise. He, too, had once stood before a judge in a county courthouse for unpaid debts. Back then, I'd pleaded on his behalf, insisted I'd help him change. But soon enough, he'd vanished, leaving me with a broken heart and a broken family. Was history repeating itself, or would David have the courage to forge a new path? When David's turn came to speak, he stood before the judge with trembling hands. "I accept responsibility," he began, voice unsteady. "I stole from Mr. Caldwell's company and lied to my mother. I'm not proud of it. I was terrified. I thought if I could just fix it quickly, no one would have to know. But my actions are my own. I'm sorry." A hush fell over the room. I glanced at Mr. Caldwell, whose face was unreadable. Beside him, Aria's eyes shone with unshed tears. I suspected that while she might not forgive David any time soon, a part of her still felt the sting of lost love. The judge reserved his decision for a later date, but from the solemn atmosphere, it was clear David's life would never be the same. Engagement reminder. Do you believe David's apology is genuine? Comment 1 if yes, 2 if no. Also, let me know how you'd feel if you were in Miriam's shoes. In the interim weeks, David remained in custody, unable to post the hefty bail amount. My meager savings, even with Aria's contribution, wouldn't come close to covering the astronomical figure the judge had set. Aria's family refused to assist, understandably, given what David had done. Still, I visited my son every chance I got. It was far from an ideal mother-son bonding time, but it was all we had left. During one visit, David told me about group therapy sessions he'd been attending for gambling addicts behind bars. "It's the first time I've spoken openly about Dad," he admitted. "I didn't realize how much I blamed him for everything." I inhaled sharply, the sting of Randall's memory searing my soul. "It's not just your father," I said softly but firmly. "You made choices, David. You took that money. You lied. That's on you." He nodded, tears glistening. "I know, but it feels like something's broken in me, Mom. I never felt good enough, like I could never match up to what Aria's family had or what Dad promised when he was still around." A wave of sympathy crashed over me. I understood the allure of wanting to be more, to have more, to rise above the limitations of one's upbringing. Yet I also knew the price of that obsession could be soul-crushing. "You have to learn to live with less before you can truly appreciate more," I said, recalling the nights I worked double shifts to keep food on the table. We fell into silence. On the other side of the glass, An officer gestured that our time was almost up. Before I left, David whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." It was a fragile glimmer of hope, a sign that beneath his transgressions, the boy I loved still lingered. Engagement reminder. It's a tough road, isn't it? Comment 1. If you think David can rebuild, or 2, if you believe some mistakes are too big to overcome. Love hearing your thoughts and where you're watching from. Casta. When sentencing day arrived, my nerves were strung tight as piano wires. The courtroom was the same austere chamber, the same looming judge's bench. David stood in front, hands clasped, shoulders slumped. Across the aisle, Mr. Caldwell, Aria, and Mrs. Caldwell sat in silent unity, their posture revealing more grief than anger now. The judge began in a clipped tone, summarizing the evidence and acknowledging David's guilty plea. My heart hammered. The maximum sentence for embezzlement was years behind bars. My mind careened through the possibilities. Would David walk out tonight with probation, or would he vanish into a corrections facility for a decade? David Hayes, the judge pronounced. This court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years, contingent on good behavior and the completion of a court-mandated rehabilitation program for gambling addiction. My breath caught in my throat as the bailiffs moved to escort David out. He turned to look at me, tears rolling down his cheeks. I mouthed, "I love you," and he nodded, sorrow etched into every line of his face. Behind me, I heard a muffled sob. Aria. I fought the urge to comfort her, uncertain if she'd even welcome my consolation. When the courtroom finally emptied, she approached me, her eyes filled with complicated emotions. "I want to believe he can change," she said, "but I can't be part of that right now." I reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Maybe one day you'll forgive him. But don't do it for him, do it for yourself. Holding on to hate is corrosive." She nodded, barely managing a tight smile before her father guided her away. I lingered a moment longer, absorbing the reality that my son would be locked away for at least 2 years. In the hush of the nearly empty courtroom, I found a bittersweet kernel of acceptance. This might be the crucible that finally forces David to confront himself. Though it pained me, it was also the only path left. Engagement reminder. 5 years. Did you see that coming? Comment 1 if you think the judge was fair. 2 if you're taken aback by the severity. Share your location if you'd like. Life after the sentencing settled into a grim routine. I visited David monthly, taking a 3-hour bus ride to the correctional facility. The environment was harsh, barbed wire fences, guard towers, a place that sapped color from the world. Each trip, I brought a small bag of essentials, fresh underwear, socks, maybe a paperback if the facility allowed it. On good days, we talked about his progress in therapy, the steps he was taking to remain sober from gambling. On bad days, we argued about the past. He wrestled with guilt and anger, often oscillating between blaming himself and blaming the world. I, too, underwent a transformation of sorts. Aria's check had helped me recover some financial ground, but it didn't change the emotional toll. Unable to continue in my old apartment, the memories felt suffocating. I moved to a smaller place across town. It was modest, just a living room, kitchen, and 1 bedroom, but it was mine. I hung the crystal vase I'd intended as a wedding gift in a place of honor on a tiny shelf. Sometimes, when the afternoon sun hit it just right, rainbows danced across the walls, a fleeting reminder that beauty can exist even in broken moments. Aria and I kept in casual contact. She mentioned returning her wedding dress, negotiating with vendors, untangling the financial fiasco David's actions had left behind. She was in the process of having his name removed from certain business documents he had signed. "I'm trying not to hate him," she confessed in one phone call, her voice a shaky whisper. But it's so hard. In the quiet moments of my new home, I often replayed the events leading up to the wedding. The lies, the mounting anxiety, the final explosive revelation. Sometimes regret gnawed at me. Maybe I should have talked to David earlier, demanded answers sooner. But part of me also recognized that he had made his own bed. If I had intervened prematurely, would it have changed anything or simply delayed the inevitable? Engagement reminder. Let me know if you think Miriam's doing a good job moving forward. Comment 1 if you agree. 2 if you think there might be a better approach. I appreciate your thoughts. Months turned into a year. David's letters from prison gave me glimpses of his internal growth. He talked about the counseling programs, how he was learning to identify triggers for his gambling urges, and how he regretted pushing me away. In one letter, he wrote, "Mom, I finally understand what it means to take responsibility. No one can save me if I'm not willing to save myself. I know I hurt you, and I know you can't trust me right away. But when I get out, I want to prove to you, and maybe even to Aria, that I can be better." Reading those words made tears slip down my cheeks. All the sacrifices I'd made, from raising him alone to pawning my ring, felt slightly less futile. I responded, encouraging him to keep going, to stay focused. If there was a slim chance this ordeal could produce genuine change, I wanted to nurture it. Around the same time, Aria reached out unexpectedly. She was participating in a philanthropic fundraiser, a gala meant to aid victims of financial scams and gambling addiction. She invited me to speak, to share my story as a mother who had unknowingly contributed to her son's destructive spiral. I hesitated. The idea of standing in front of strangers, airing my pain, felt both terrifying and oddly empowering. "Your story might resonate with people," she told me over the phone. "It might help them realize how gambling doesn't just affect the gambler, it affects everyone around them." After several sleepless nights wrestling with the decision, I agreed. On the day of the gala, I donned a simple black dress and tried to steady my nerves. Aria greeted me at the entrance to an upscale event hall, not unlike the one where her doomed wedding had taken place. A wave of deja vu struck me, but I pushed it aside. This time was different. This time, I wasn't an uninvited, humiliated guest. I was here to share a cautionary tale that might spare someone else the agony. Engagement reminder. Would you have spoken at the gala? Comment 1 if you'd share your story. 2 if you'd keep it private. I love hearing your take. Standing at the podium under the bright lights, I took a moment to center myself. The audience was a sea of sharply dressed attendees, philanthropists, mental health advocates, community leaders. Aria introduced me in a calm, poised voice. She spoke about my journey and how it intertwined with her own. Despite everything that had happened, there was no bitterness in her tone, just a clear desire to turn our tragic circumstances into something constructive. I began with how I'd pawned my ring, explaining the sentimental value it held and how it symbolized a future that never came to pass. As I spoke, the memory of Randall's betrayal and the heartbreak of David's lies tugged at my voice. I recounted the day I was barred from entering my son's wedding, how it felt like a personal apocalypse. I admitted that I'd given David money out of love and desperation, never questioning why he was so desperate until it was too late. While I shared my story, I noticed tears in more than one pair of eyes. Something about bearing witness to vulnerability resonates deeply with people. I elaborated on the ripples of destruction caused by addiction, how it doesn't just ravage the addict, but also parents, children, partners, and friends, even employees in a company if embezzlement is involved. When I finished, the room fell silent for a few heartbeats before erupting in applause. My cheeks warmed, and I spotted Aria smiling through tears near the back of the room. That applause wasn't just for me. It was for every parent, spouse, or friend who'd seen a loved one drift into the quicksand of addiction and had found the courage to speak up. Later that night, an older gentleman approached me, tears in his eyes, and said, "My son lost everything to gambling. I had no idea how to help. Listening to you gave me hope that we can still heal." I realized then that I'd inadvertently become part of something bigger, an unspoken network of parents and loved ones standing on the same battlefield, each with their own scars. Engagement reminder. Does Miriam's speech resonate with you? Comment 1. If you think sharing personal struggles can spark healing. 2. If you believe in privacy above all else. Thanks for sticking with me. But in the weeks after the gala, Arya and I grew closer in a strange, unexpected friendship. We'd meet for coffee, discussing everything from her job to my new life in a smaller apartment. She occasionally mentioned that her father, Mr. Caldwell, whom I'd once seen as the epitome of arrogance, had softened somewhat since the wedding fiasco. The scandal surrounding David's arrest had cast a spotlight on the company's finances, and Mr. Caldwell was determined to prove that everything else was above board. She even joked that maybe David's infiltration, though illegal and immoral, had prompted some overdue corporate accountability. I wrote David letters detailing the gala and the fundraising efforts to combat gambling addiction. In response, he expressed genuine pride. "Mom, you're amazing. You turned our darkest moment into something positive." That was the day I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could emerge from this on the other side better people than we'd been before. When David had served 13 months, he became eligible for a parole hearing. I sat in a stuffy waiting room at the prison, the walls painted a dismal gray that did nothing to alleviate the tension thrumming in my veins. Through the glass window of the hearing room, I watched David face the parole board. He spoke about his counseling, about how he'd immersed himself in addiction recovery programs, and how he regretted not only the crime but the betrayal of those who loved him most. His admission of guilt was raw and unvarnished. He didn't attempt to downplay or deflect. When one board member asked why he believed he was ready to rejoin society, David answered, "Because for the first time, I understand that my problem isn't bad luck or circumstance. It's me. I have to own it every day." My heart clenched with both pride and sorrow. Watching him accept responsibility felt like the son I'd always hoped to see. There were no assurances this would guarantee him freedom. Yet, seeing his resolve offered me a rare spark of optimism. Engagement reminder. Do you think David deserves parole? Comment 1 if yes, 2 if no. And feel free to share where you're from if you haven't yet. A week later, the decision arrived. David was granted parole, effective in 2 months, on the condition that he continue therapy and maintain steady employment once released. Relief and nervous anticipation flooded me. I spent the following weeks preparing my humble apartment for his return. It wasn't the sprawling place we'd once shared, but it was a safe space, somewhere he could start anew. I also kept in touch with Arya. She'd moved on in many ways, started seeing someone else, though cautiously, and poured herself into philanthropic work. One afternoon, as we sipped coffee in my tiny living room, she admitted she still loved David. "Not in a romantic sense," she clarified, "but I care. I want him to be well." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I think I forgave him a while ago, but I'm not ready to let him back into my life beyond that." When David finally walked out of the prison gates, thinner and more subdued than I'd ever seen him, my heart nearly burst. We embraced quietly, both aware this was a fragile moment. The warmth of his body against mine reminded me of the boy who used to hug me fiercely after a nightmare. We drove home in silence, occasional glances passing between us. By unspoken agreement, we both understood that talk was cheap. Real change would require action and accountability. During his first few days of freedom, David busied himself applying for jobs. Most turned him away once they saw his record, but he persisted. On the second week, a local community center offered him a part-time position, helping with administration for their addiction recovery programs, an ironic twist of fate that could be his redemption. He accepted eagerly, determined to make amends, not just to me or Arya, but to every part of himself he had betrayed. It was a slow process, each day a new challenge. The temptation to revert to old habits simmered below the surface. But David attended regular therapy sessions, scheduled appointments with his parole officer, and contributed what he could to household expenses. For the first time in years, I felt a cautious sense of equilibrium. Engagement reminder. Are you rooting for David's successful reintegration? Comment 1 if yes, 2 if you remain skeptical. Your feedback means a lot. Months passed, weaving together a tapestry of small victories and lingering regrets. Yet, within the threads of our new normal, I discovered an unexpected sense of peace. David was rebuilding his life from the rubble of his past decisions, and I was finally learning to separate my happiness from his actions. We lived simply. My old ring was gone for good, but I'd salvaged something more valuable, a renewed sense of self-worth. Arya stayed in touch sporadically, sending the occasional text asking about David's progress. Sometimes I thought about how her life might have been if the wedding had gone as planned. She never said it directly, but I suspected she'd found a measure of fulfillment in channeling her heartbreak into advocacy work. In many ways, we all had. One weekend, David and I visited the ocean, a place we hadn't gone since he was a child. The rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore felt cleansing, a relentless yet calming force. We walked along the water's edge, shoes in our hands, letting the tide wash over our feet. After a long stretch of silence, he said, "Mom, I know it'll take time to earn your full trust again." I paused, considering his words. "You've come a long way," I said quietly, gazing out at the horizon. "Just don't stop." A gull cried overhead, and we watched it circle before disappearing into the distance. The hush that followed was filled with more hope than any conversation could convey. Through the swirling chaos of the past year, we had found a fragile but precious space where redemption was possible. As I stood there with my son, the memory of being turned away at his wedding door no longer stung like an open wound. It felt more like a cautionary tale, a reminder of how illusions can crumble and truths can set us free, no matter how painful they are to face. I understood now that the ring I'd pawned wasn't just a symbol of lost dreams. It was a catalyst that exposed our deepest flaws and forced us to confront them. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. Final engagement reminder. Thank you for reading this expanded story. Comment 1 if you found hope in the end. 2 if you still have mixed feelings. Feel free to share any final thoughts. Your feedback means a lot. Thank you so much for joining me today on her Fireside Stories. I hope you found the journey of this family's secrets and sacrifices as compelling as I did. If you enjoyed the story, please take a moment to subscribe, drop a comment sharing your perspective, and let me know where you've been listening from. Your support helps us bring more powerful and heartfelt tales to life. Until next time, take care and keep those stories burning bright.